Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, my guest is Marisa Morby. Marisa is a principal researcher for design and strategy at Observable HQ and is a product design expert. Marisa takes a lot of inspiration from nature in design, and in our discussion today, we go deep on this. We talk about what makes product design really good, and we explore principles like the Gestalt design principles as well as biophilic design. Biophilic meaning the love of biology. And so we talk through things like living walls and skeuomorphism and design patterns that are inspired by the natural world. We even talk about broadly what is design? Like, how does design show up in the natural world around us? And how can we take this design from the natural world and bring it to software solutions? Marisa is also an enthusiast and expert on urban planning and sustainability, and is collaborating on a book for urban planners that helps cities evolve as they continue to grow and accommodate more people and also accommodate sustainability goals. This episode is absolutely jam-packed about design and sustainability and nature. And if any of those are interests of yours, then this episode is for you. If you're an engineer, probably who also struggles with design, like what makes you may know how to code, you may know TypeScript, you may know React, you may know all these things, you may know AI, you may know whatever, but design has always been challenging. If you're this person, this episode is also for you. Marisa is an absolute expert and joy to talk to, and I'm so excited to share this episode with you. Now, this episode, I will say this, has issues with audio. Some audio systems didn't work during recording, and we did our absolute best to make it sound as good as possible. But unfortunately, the machines just weren't happy with this one. So appreciate your patience with this specific episode. It's an exception for sure, but we'll pay more attention to the audio going forward. This is a labor of love and very much separate to my day job. And the way we can make it sustainable, speaking of sustainability, is through sponsors and partners. So let's take a moment to acknowledge them, and then we'll get to the episode. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters is a great way to level up your coding by having you pick a programming language that you want to get better at, something like TypeScript or JavaScript or Python or R or Rust. And then they have you pick a tool like Redis or Docker or Kubernetes or Git, and they have you build this tool in the language you choose and hold your hand along the way. And by doing this, you get better at the tool you're interested in, like Redis or Docker. And you also get better at the programming language like Rust or Julia or TypeScript or whatever. And by doing this, again, it's a double whammy. So they have a generous free tier, but if you want to start paying, you can get up to 40% off by following the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. Thanks so much for sticking around. And now for my discussion with the great Marisa Morby. Marisa Morby, welcome.
Hi.
I'm so excited to chat with you. I mean, we've spent so much time talking around conferences and in Berlin, and every single conversation has left me inspired, specifically about the work you do in and around nature and design. So today, I'm really excited to have this discussion.
I am excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I love to talk about nature, so I'm very excited to answer any questions, chat about it.
Let's just start the discussion by talking about just the title of this episode, right? Understanding design through nature, because design is so pervasive. Just a few days ago on social media, Sunil Pai, the founder of PartyKit, Cloud, now works at Cloudflare, mentioned it's been, I think he said 14 years since Steve Jobs died. And he says nothing has ever come close to that, which I think was a very profound statement. So with that, Steve Jobs, we're not on a first name basis, he's also dead, so we can't be. But Apple was very design forward. And when I think of design, that's where I go. And so this whole concept of understanding design through nature, can we talk about that? Let's just start at the very beginning, like at the surface, at the top for those listening, and let's take them on a journey with us. What does that look like practically, and what does it mean? Understanding design through nature.
So I think for me, nature is a huge inspiration, because design is something that works. Like, when you say the word design, you will get a different response depending on, like, if you talk to 8 people, you'll get 8 different responses, sometimes more. but to me, design is something that works. And if you're going back to the root, kind of the root of design, if it is something that works, we look at nature and it is so well designed because it not only just works, but it also creates life, which is bizarre. Like to have something in existence that's all around us that like spontaneously creates life is, in my opinion, like the ultimate design. And so I think for me, that is why it's such a huge inspiration for design and why I feel like you can look to nature to understand how systems work, because the first system was the natural system and we all live within that. And I think especially when we get into, we're doing a lot of work in tech, we're doing work on computers, we're doing work that is very much separated from physical reality. And so it makes us feel like, oh, well, we're separate from that thing. Like nature's this very kind of touchy-feely thing over here, and we're over here doing, like different work on computers when it's all the same. Like the brain is a human computer that we don't even understand completely. We can wire up computers to, do different things, do programming and things like that, but we don't even understand how a brain works. And it is a human computer. They only recently mapped a fly's brain. It's taken until 2024 for them to even map the brain of a fly because it's so complex.
Wow. Wait, so they mapped the full brain of a fly? Like they have the entire neural network, like document.
Yeah, and it like this was I think in June or July of 2024 that they did this, and it is the only animal that has a fully mapped neural pathway because they're just too complex. Because it's a
Wow.
computer. Like your
Yeah.
brain is a supercomputer.
So we could have like actually like fly GPT at this. Like we could literally like do like if it's a big neural network, we could just duplicate the entire thing now and into a
I
computer.
hope not. I don't want that. I'm a no on fly GPT.
Yeah. No, but silliness aside, look, you said so. What I'm hearing from you, Marissa, is that nature is design. You said earlier that when you ask people what design is, you'll get like many different answers, and I think this is true. Then do I understand correctly that your answer is design really is nature, and nature is design? Like that's where it starts because you said this was the first system. Awesome. This is also very comforting for me because you mentioned the work that we do as engineers is very disconnected from the physical world. Um, I'll admit this, I'm useless in the physical world. Like when it comes to like real things that people do, like household tasks, I've got these little like cables hanging from the ceiling that you're supposed to put a light bulb on. But to this day, I just don't know how to like attach a light bulb to it. I assume you need some type of adapter. I don't. So meanwhile, I can code like entire systems and startups and companies and things. Uh, yeah, what I'm hearing from you is it's all connected, and if I'm useful on a computer, I can be useful in the real world because that's the original design.
Yeah, and I think that you'll find that things transfer over, right? Like when you understand how a natural system works, it helps you understand, you can apply it to different types of systems, either in business or in programming languages. Like it's all kind of like decision trees and if this then that, which is very much the basis of most programming languages, right? It's like if this then
Yeah.
that. It's all if statements. And so I think with nature it is very much the same thing. Like you know if we have, talk about watershed's a huge thing for urban planning. It's like,
Can we maybe define that first? Because I have to assume
yeah,
there's a lot of people who are engineers like me who don't know it in the
sure.
detail that you do.
So watershed is whenever there is precipitation, either rain or snow, the resulting water from that is called watershed.
Okay.
And in urban settings, it's a huge issue because water always finds the path of least resistance. If you are on somewhere like a flat plain like Chicago, what that means is you get standing water. It's very dangerous. Like not knowing how your water is shedding out of your area, out of your living area, is super dangerous because standing
Because it can lead to like mosquitoes and things.
death. It can lead to death.
What?
Yeah,
That got really dark.
I know, but it's true. Like in Chicago, they had their watershed basically. They weren't able to get rid of their water because it's a completely flat plain. And so because of that, they had standing water everywhere. Cholera was like a huge epidemic in the early and mid 1800s. So they ended up having to physically raise the entire city, building by building, to put in sewer systems so that they could handle the water and the watershed,
Wow.
um, which is fascinating. So, like, Chicago is basically built 10 feet or so up off of the natural ground because they physically went around and used jack screws to raise all of the buildings manually and put in
What?
sewer systems. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Wow. Okay, how does this translate then to a like a software concept? Like what in the digital world does this physical concern influence and affect?
So I think that if we're talking about the digital world, like we think about how one thing affects another, right? Like if I am creating, I guess for design, like I think about this specifically in design, but if we're creating a product or a system that we haven't thoroughly thought through, we think, oh, well, we can just go from step A to step B and it's fine. We don't consider the knock on effects of that system, which is similar to a watershed. Like you think there's water, now it's on the ground. Great. Like we're done. But no, it's not done. Like there are knock-on effects from how the water gets to the ground to where it's going. If it stays where it's pooling, you have like epidemics. Similar to when you're talking about design, you can go from point A to point B. Okay, we've gotten the user or whatever to do point A to point B in this product. And then what? Like, are we creating a good path? Are we creating something that allows for bad actors to really get a foothold? You have to think in a systems way in order to get from point A all the way to point Z. And I think that when you look at how the natural world functions, it just helps you reframe point A to point B. It makes you understand that it's never point A to point B. There's always other things that happen, and you have to think about everything within a system.
Wow. When did this start? Like when did you first start to think about that all of this is connected and that nature is sort of the proto design and it influences and affects all other design that sort of stems from it, pun intended. When was this on the job? Was this building some software? Was this before? Like did you study botany? Like
I think that it probably started when I was a kid, honestly. I was very lucky. My grandma had like a huge yard and I got to garden as a little kid. Had my own garden. And I think when I was little and I would get to grow my own things, I grew my own plants, I grew my own vegetables, and you get to see that life cycle. And so it's always been something that I always think about first because I find it fascinating. Like I find it absolutely magical that life even exists. It shouldn't. Like it's statistically bizarre that it exists. And so the fact that you can just throw a little thing in some dirt and give it a little water and do nothing and watch it become life is fascinating. And so I think that I've just always been fascinated with that system and have always enjoyed applying it to other things because it's like it's the first system I was ever introduced to, but I didn't, of course, when I was like 8, I didn't realize it was a system. It was just something I thought was really fun.
would it be a fair if we take I like what you said about the system of nature. You take a little seed, you put it in the dirt, and you water it and just wait, and then it becomes a thing, and it lives and it grows. And if it's like a big sequoia, it's gonna live for like hundreds of years, and then it's gonna develop a complex root network and have children like all halfway across the world. It's gonna be a big thing, and then one day it'll die, right? As most things do. Um, is it appropriate of a metaphor to say in terms of software engineering? ideas are like this. Like you have an idea, you water it, you build a thing, becomes maybe a company, 500,000 employees, and at some point it will probably die. Um, like I think, Google, Meta, Microsoft, whatever, they're great companies, but they're gonna die one day. I think everything, like it's a bit overly optimistic to think they won't, right? It's the way of nature. Does that metaphor track? Or am I thinking about this slightly differently?
I actually really like that metaphor. And I think too, in when we talk about trees, because you mentioned sequoias, um, a lot of arborists will say, like when a tree dies, it's only fulfilled half of its life's purpose.
Oh, wow.
And I think that that is very similar to businesses too. So businesses start, right, as a tiny little seed, they grow, and eventually they will die. But the ideas and the people that come out of those businesses, even when they've died, start completely new things, right? So there are businesses that couldn't have existed if something else didn't exist first because it created the adjacent possible. And so in that way, I actually think it's exactly like trees. Because when a tree dies, you have all this life that's created beforehand, right? Where like the tree is creating, it's like sending out a mycelial network, which is what is like a fungal network that communicates with the rest of its area. And that like shares resources back and forth. Eventually, the tree dies. But at that point, it becomes the ground on which other things grow. And without if trees didn't die, if they did live forever, we wouldn't have the biodiversity that we have now. Like you need them to die to create something new, which I think is really similar with business, right?
Yeah.
Like things have to have a cycle. They have to end in order for there to be new things created off of those things that haven't made it.
This is so cool. This slightly reminds me, if you're talking business and tech startups and companies, it reminds me of Perplexity, right? Because it's for those who maybe don't use it, you probably should. I don't use Google anymore, like at all. Um, but Perplexity is for those listening, it's like a search engine, but with an LLM, and it uses your LLM of choice, actually Claude or OpenAI, whatever you want, and it searches the web, but just like reads the results for you, and then like gives you an answer conversationally. Was started, as far as I know, by a former Google engineer, and so sort of like Google exists, and it gave birth to this great engineer Arvind who started Perplexity, um, and Google may die. It may lose the AI race. I think it's not really unreasonable to say such a thing. And maybe its whole purpose was to set up this next phase. Of course, the board and the investors and all the politics wouldn't like that, but I think that's so cool. And I love that the metaphor tracks. Like we can, like everything has a purpose, and the purpose is to just set up for the next thing. This also reminds me of state machines, right? There's so many. The metaphors go so deep. So everything's a tree.
Everything is a tree. And it's so funny you mentioned a state machine because um, Jason, my husband, was showing me, he's doing a state machine right now for the show that he's working on. And so he's doing this, it's just, it's a decision tree that activates and stuff. And it was funny because when he showed it to me, I was like, oh, he's like, I made a state machine. And I was like, oh, it's a decision tree. Everything in what, not everything, but like everything is a tree, maybe in one way or another.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, which I don't know. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, even Git. I mean, if we think about Git was like you literally have a thing and it's Git branch and you fork like trees fork branch. That's wild. Can we, if we think about design, I think we eventually have to talk about user interface design. And okay, I'm already starting to see, I'm catching your drift, Marissa, where nature itself has user interfaces, right? Like we have, for example, we in India actually we eat off banana leaves, literally. That like so the plate, the interface is leaves. Um, what are some examples of how a natural pattern influences a really stunning user interface?
Well, I think if we don't use humans as the user, there are so many options for that. So if you look at, and flowers are an easy one, because I think flowers have probably the loudest and boldest interface, and we can't see a lot of it. Like as humans, we can't see a lot of it.
You
So
mean like pollen floating in the air?
I
Huh.
mean like the actual interface on a flower petal or a flower itself. So um, both bees and birds have different receptors in their brains to allow them to see a different color wave than humans can see. They can see an additional color wave.
Wow.
So birds can see, I think birds and bees can see UV light, basically. And so a lot of flowers that we see this beautiful pattern, right? Like if you look at an orchid, there are a lot of orchids where there's like a pattern on the bottom petal that actually looks like kind of a landing strip, which are for pollinators, right? It's like a
Wow.
visual indicator of like, here you go, like land here, please. And we can see some of those, but there are different UV receptors or different, sorry, UV kind of not painted, but UV colored strips on petals that birds and bees can see that we can't. And when you look at those, when that has been translated into a color that people can see, flowers actually are like, they're so bright. Like they're a different color to other animals.
Wow.
And those colors indicate they're kind of like arrows, like, like on a runway to show them that one, I'm flashing bright to let you know that I'm here. And two, you need to come into this spot in order to get the food. And so I think if you're talking about user interfaces, flowers are they're great we can see a lot of them from a human level, but for birds and bees, or I guess for pollinators in general, they are able to see color waves in a different way. So colors are brighter and it mutes things that aren't important to them. So like for bees, red flowers are much brighter because red is a receptor that they have. They don't have a lot of the other receptors. So like if you're in a garden and there's a bunch of red flowers, they can see those, but they can't see the other ones very well. So it kind of grays out things that aren't important to them. So from a user interface perspective, like completely designed with their user in mind, um, and to, for them to be able to get pollinated and continue life.
That is so cool. Wow. Do we know if like airport runways took inspiration from this?
I would love to know that. I've actually never looked it up. I haven't talked about that with anyone before, so that's something I should look up because it might be. Because like orchids, they look like a landing strip. Like if you think to yourself landing strip and then you go look at it, like it is very similar. So
Wow.
possibly.
Okay, like tell us. I feel like the internet people like to leave comments. Like go do research and tell us because that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Nature came up with airport landing strips before we did. That is so cool. And I love how we tie this to user experience, but not for once. I'm such a like humanistic narcissist that I never thought users are not human, you know? But for the pollinators, that is such a great interface. It's sort of like the if we tie this to like a web page like the call to action button being that one solid color button and the other one being the outline, right? This is nature's version of that. That's absolutely wild. Um, what do you think in relation to this skeuomorphic design shouldn't have been erased from where it was? Like, for example, iOS 6 was very, it embraced skeuomorphic design, which is, for those listening who haven't heard this term, it's just like your camera app, the icon is of actual physical camera. And back in the day, iOS, the camera app, used to have this awesome shutter animation, just like a real camera. So it was when software elements look like their hardware counterparts, just to bring that natural familiarity, right? There's still a level of nature in a hardware camera that a software camera will never ever have. And so it's like binding, I guess, between the physical and the non-physical. And so with that, if we're talking about user interfaces, what's your take on skeuomorphism? Should we bring it back? Was it a mistake to let it go? Do you use it in your own sort of design work?
I have less of a hard line on like using skeuomorphism or not. I'm a big believer in heuristics. So like whatever is being adopted at a mass level from a design perspective is probably the best thing. I liked skeuomorphic design. I don't know, it was fun. It was very I don't people probably aren't going to like this term, but kind of gritty. Like it's probably not the right term, but like it did feel very physical, like you're putting a physical thing and just like plopping it onto the computer.
Yeah.
You can see it, which I did like. But I do think that from a design perspective, as long as we follow heuristics, like what what people understand most intuitively, or they've become most familiar with, that's the quote unquote right thing to use, which I think we see in interfaces a lot now, right? Where there are, like, if you look at landing pages across the internet now, I would be confident
They're
in
all the
saying that
same.
when we were both looking at the internet a long time ago, landing pages were all different. And now they're all pretty much the same. Like there's this idea of like the amount of text that you want at the beginning, but make sure the button
Yeah.
is above the line at least a little bit, you know, and then scrolling behavior has become pretty what's the word? Generalized across the board for landing pages. So I think that that's a good example of like a UI or like a user interface becoming using heuristics to create something that's very common, which I don't necessarily know is a bad thing. Like, to me, the most amazing thing about the internet is the access that it gives people across the world and allowing people to share ideas where, you know, previously it would take sometimes months or years to get an idea from one place to another, whereas now we can do it in seconds. And if that means that that certain visual aspects of design become more commonplace and more generalized, I don't necessarily know that that's bad as long as access is expanded. Um, and then I think that leaves more options for artistic expression in different ways, you know?
Yeah. Uh, that you said artistic expression, and that is what I was gonna talk about when you mentioned this like blending of heuristics across the web. Because like you're right. When we were younger, children maybe, there was the landing pages were so different, but they had similar quote unquote heuristics, right? There was the dancing baby, there was the under construction like tape sign, and there was this in some cases where the developer was extra creative, this like clock, this actual like rotary clock that would follow your cursor. Like I remember at least like 30-40% of websites I used to visit when I was a child had this, and I thought it was my website had a dancing baby just because why not? And Sarah Vieira, I think a friend of ours, has a cool make the web fun again or something like website that embraces all of this. Um, Fast forward to today, like you said, all the websites look the same, and it's good in that ensures access. But I wonder if it just if it makes things less sort of exotic and creative. I think if we now jump from software back to nature, right? Um, Nature is timeless, but what we do with nature isn't. And what I mean by that is like architecture. So I live in Berlin, and like if you go down, there's a street called Frankfurter Allee. Um, it's these beautiful houses with like Victorian windows and like details, you know. And if you go to what was East Berlin, previously owned by the Soviet Union, it's all this like communist, like everything looks the same. It's very Soviet, it's very socialist. And so the socialist housing at the time, everybody had access to it. It just wasn't very good. Meanwhile, the upper class literally spent like government money that could have gone to people's food and access instead to make like pretty Victorian windows, you know. And so I feel like there's nuance and trade-offs here that yes, access is good, but access comes at a cost of everything being sort of mundane and dead and gray. Um, you know what I mean? Like and maybe that's good if everyone. That's probably definitely good if everybody has access to something versus just a few people having access to pretty things. Like for example, I think of this guy's website. I don't know his name, but there's this one developer whose personal website is a 3D game, like with a little car. It's like orange. You've probably seen this. Um, I feel like a lot of people who are new to computing wouldn't know how to use this website, and so they wouldn't have access to its contents. But at the same time, it's like Victorian Windows style cute. Now, with all of that said, can we like dig in? I want to get your take on this nuance here. Like, what are some trade-offs, and when's it good to break the pattern? When's it not?
So I think I would push back that some of those things are design. I don't think they're design. I think they're artistic expression. So like if we're talking about the architecture of a home, the design of the home is probably very similar in that Victorian home versus the social housing. They all have a bathroom, they all have a kitchen, they all have a common living area, and they all probably have a private bedroom, maybe more than one. Um, the artistic expression comes in the styling of the windows. It comes in the styling of the facade on the social housing. And one, it sounds like, is kind of stripped of that, while the other has a lot of it, and which therefore like drove the cost up for that building, right? And I think that this is where my like deeply seated beliefs in design are, is like design is what works. Like design is the function of a thing. The artistic expression on top of it can be completely different from one thing to another. So like maybe all the landing pages have the same interactions, but they can do different stylings to make them more interesting, more visually appealing, more artistic. And I guess to me, they're two very different things, because I consider myself a designer in that I can design patterns and systems that people understand and can use. But I don't consider myself someone who does like a lot of visual design on the web. However, I am an artist, and so I do art separately, right? And some of that stuff is not super well designed because it's art. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's meant
It's meant
to
to embrace the chaos.
or evoke something different, like evoke a different emotion, or not even be used at all. Like it's meant to just sit there and be looked at, you know? Um, and so that's where I think depending on who you talk to, the line of what is design like expands, or not line, but like the scope of design and where it begins and ends kind of expands or shrinks. Because I think it's really important to have a difference between design and artistic expression, because they're both really important.
You've definitely taught me something today. I mean, I've been conflating these two my entire life. And so I kind of like your separation because it helps me compartmentalize. You know, like design is, correct me if I'm wrong. What just saying back to you what you said so I can make sure I understand it. Design is what it takes to serve the purpose, what it takes to make the functional function. And this could be, you know, something with a lot of expensive accoutrement or something with just the basics. But design is ultimately, yeah, okay, it's the structure, it's the skeleton on which you build the skin and bone. Okay, awesome. Wow, that's so cool. And because of that, it's this great unifier that has no opinions about rich or poor or access or whatever. It's just optimizing for meeting a need, and then you can meet that need however you want. This is so cool. This also makes sense now with all the cool landing pages we see, because while it's true that every landing page kind of looks the same, some really do stand out in contrast to others, but they still employ the same design. Whoa, my mind is blown so hard because some of them have this cool like shiny light type effect. You know what I'm talking about? Wow. Okay. So, yeah.
I think a really good example of this that you can actually track over years is Lynn Fisher. So every year, Lynn Fisher does redoes her website and builds a new one. But and I've been following Lynn Fisher for years. So every year at the end of the year, so much pressure for her, and I apologize. Every year at the end of the year, I'm like, what's her new site gonna be? And if you look at it from like the site that she did for 2025 versus the sites that she's done in many years past, the structure of the site is always the same. What she changes is her artistic expression. And some people might be like, she changes the design. But I would say she has not changed the design. She changes the artistic expression of the site, because the functionality of the site remains the same. every year.
Interesting. This is very inspiring because this also I feel like is what if we wow, this is one of my favorite episodes, I have to say. Like where there's so many layers here. There's layers of business and software and nature. To just speak to one of the other layers, if we compare this to business execution, right? Um, a lot of businesses do the same thing. That's why they're competitors. Like Anthropic and OpenAI are literally doing the same thing. Data stacks and MongoDB at the database level doing exactly the same thing. But so the design is what they do, and the artistic expression, as you put it, is how they do it. And really, it's the combination of does the design work to meet the need? Yes, that's the first layer. And then the second layer is does the artistic expression evoke something that makes your business sticky, that makes sticky in the minds of users, right? That makes them like look at this and go like, this is the thing. And like if we tie it back to Steve Jobs as we talked about earlier, like I feel like the iPhone and all of Apple products really is exactly this. Like they all look the same. Like I can't tell you a MacBook Air and a MacBook like a regular MacBook anymore. I can't tell the difference. But there's this level of artistic expression in minimalism and industrial design where it's like aluminum and glass, and you just know. In fact, I could you could give me a phone made like an Android phone that is made to copy an iPhone, and I will just tell you, blind that it's not an iPhone because even the way they like brush their glass, like it's also so Apple, so to speak. So that's their, if I understand you correctly, that's the business's artistic expression on the design of a phone, which everyone does.
That's how I see it, because I think that if we lump everything into design, it makes it more difficult to it like forces us into a box, right? But if we say like there's design, which is the skeleton, and then there's everything that's on top of it, which is an artistic expression, it gives us a lot more freedom to do. It releases us of a burden because the design is now constrained to how something
Function.
works and
Yeah.
function, but the artistic expression can be whatever we want. So I find that very freeing.
Yeah, I think this is so cool. I mean, this is also a strong point for job interviews, I think, like the whole recruiting process, because they're having to choose between like 100 different candidates or more for a position. And this question always happens, right? Why should we pick you? What's your edge? How do you like differentiate yourself from other candidates? And really it's no, I do exactly the same thing as that person and this person, and that person. I just do it differently. And I'm not saying it's better, it's just different. And maybe this flavor of different artistic expression is the one that's most compatible for the company right now. And maybe it's not, and that's fine. Um, Incredible. This is so cool.
And I also see artistic expression, and you're talking about interviewing now, but I see artistic expression as a way of connecting. You mentioned businesses wanting to be sticky, and I agree with that. And I would use the word connection. Like every person has a core need of wanting to be seen, and when we are able personally to see one another, we create deeper connections. And I think that when businesses and products create something that lets people feel seen, that creates a sticky product. Like they understand they understand me. And I don't even think we go through that in our brain. Like we don't go through that thought process because like I don't know, like Apple doesn't understand me. You know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
in a way they do. Like they see what you want and they're able to connect with you on a level that makes you continue buying the iPhone or makes you continue buying the Mac, right? Um, and so I think the artistic expression that the thing that we layer on top of the skeleton or the structure is what connects is what actually ends up connecting and making something sticky.
Wow. And so it's the artistic expression of my business or my application for this job or my whatever resonates with your identity. You feel seen. That's so cool. I think if we make this really practical for those listening, I've been in situations where, there's things that bog me down. There's things that be it politics or someone hating me on the internet saying like this happens from time to time. People go like, "Oh, can you believe he said he said he's a huge fan of XAI. Oh my gosh, that's Elon Musk's company. We hate him now. Like people literally do this. And I think, and then what I do is I go to my friends and family and I tell, they're like, hey, why the long face? And I'm like, well, people are being mean to me and it's whatever. I'm used to it, but sometimes it does get me down. And um, there have been situations where my social supports of friends and family have been like, oh yeah, but you kind of messed up. They don't, they tell me, they sort of agree with the haters sometimes. And while there's merit to that, because I can reflect and grow, there's also this sense of like, I don't feel like you're seeing me right now because I just wanted you to go like, well, screw them, they're the worst. But they don't do that. But when they do that, then I feel this is what you're talking about. I feel seen. And I guess your point is when a brand or a company does that, that makes us like loyal. And I think Apple, like you mentioned, does this extremely well. Like, indeed, they don't know me, but I'm looking at it right now. So there's this marketing philosophy that they had, that you may have seen, that was published January 3rd, 1977. I was like minus 20 something years old. It's wild. And their marketing philosophy then under Steve Jobs was threefold. They had, the top of it was empathy. And they say we will truly understand their needs better than any other company. And then focus, they decided to eliminate all of the unimportant things. And third, they made this point, and I want to get your take on this with design because I think it's so on brand. The third point was impute. They say people do judge a book by its cover, and they say we may have the best product, the highest quality, the most useful, but if we present them in a slipshod way, meaning if our artistic expression is not decent, they will be perceived as slipshod. And if we present them in a creative, professional manner, that is, if our artistic expression is creative and professional, then we'll impute those qualities into our products. And this was from 1977. And I think they do that. They have maximum empathy. I don't know how they work, so I can't speak to the focus, but I feel like they do impute that, right? They present things with polish, kind of like, I guess, um, Vercel does today, to some degree. And so, with that, what's your take on that? Do you agree? Especially with imputing, people do judge a book by its cover, and so if we want them to perceive, excuse me, our artistic expression a certain way, then we sort of, for lack of a better expression, fake it until we make it.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that we make, well, we know, like research has shown us that we make instant decisions when we see things, like visually when we see things, right? We instantly judge the quality of something when we see it within, I think it's something like 0.3 seconds, like really fast. I would need to find
What?
it. There's a paper on this. There's a paper on this. Yeah. That I've read. I would need to find it for you and I can find that and the landing strip thing. But, anyway, so I 100% agree with that. And I think that the reason is like, you can tell when something is made with care and with quality. I don't know how we know, but we know, like we can tell that, a physical piece of furniture was made with like heavy good wood. We can tell when a piece of hardware is made with heavy good metal. And
Is it just heaviness that makes
I,
things feel
I
like?
think no, weight is a huge thing in like physical design, 100%. It's like a huge aspect of physical design. And I think that phones, I don't know, I think they're there's like they're in ceramics, there's this idea of perfect weight. So things must weigh physically when you pick them up, like you close your eyes and things must weigh the appropriate amount for the thing that you were holding. And like
Wow.
when you get that right, you can feel it. You can
Wow.
feel it when the pot is too heavy or too light. And it's a quality of design issue or quality of design. So anyway, weight is a separate thing, but I do agree that like you absolutely judge a book by its cover. And when in doubt, if you're trying to pick something, a friend once told me, like, if you're trying to pick a good wine, and you don't know anything about it, pick the wine label that has the best design to you. Because if they cared enough to make a label that was high quality and illustrative, the wine is probably pretty good too. And I think that that is sort of
That's
exactly what
exactly
Apple
it.
is saying,
Yeah.
just, for their hardware.
Yeah. To bring it back to the job market, oh, I love this discussion so much because all of this, like you said, nature is the original design and everything stems from that. So cool. If we bring this now to the job market and interviewing, um, I will say this: like I've had to hire. Thankfully, I'm not a manager anymore. But I've had to hire and fill a team. And when I received like GitHub links from candidates, um, the first thing I notice, Marissa, is the README. And if it's some default create React app README, I immediately just well, yeah, if there's enough volume, then that one's just going in the archive for later, right? And so I think that tracks there. Do you agree? Like when somebody applies for a job, it's sort of their responsibility to not be slipshod about it because if they put care into the application, um, then there's a higher probability that they're going to put care into the job. And this is where like we find a debate because I often tell people, especially people I'm mentoring, like new people in the industry, the cover letter matters. The cover letter matters a lot. This is your shot to make an impression, and if you tell them like why you're a good fit for the position, then they'll actually read it and it will help your chances. And there's other people saying no, it doesn't matter, don't write it. You're not using your time effectively. Um, Based on all of that, one, does the metaphor track? And two, what's your take on cover letters in this context?
I think the metaphor does track, and I think that this is again where we get design and artistic expression. There's design in how you end up on the GitHub link, right? So like if you are like when I was looking for a job, I created a separate landing page and went through and really thought about like how is this person going to read through and click through things to get to the next stage, to get to where I want them to go. And that's a design question. Like, how do I want someone to perceive me? And what do I want the experience of that first digital interaction to be with me? But then there's the kind of artistic expression on top, which is the README. They might not read it. Or they might, like you, put a lot of weight into it. But that's where you see the personality and how that person kind of interacts with other people, right? And I would say that is artistic expression and making sure that you have a quality interaction is very much exactly like what Apple is saying, where, you know, if it's that design has to be quality design. In terms of cover letters, I feel like I take a more philosophical view of it. If I'm applying for a job, I always write a cover letter, and I write the cover letter less for the job than for me. If I can't muster up enough interest to write a cover letter that sounds like I'm interested, then it's not worth applying. So I use it as like a test for myself. Like I have literally filled out applications, gone to write the cover letter, and I'm like, oh, I can't. Like I can't. And so I think that if you can't come up with something that is quality in your cover letter that explains, you know, I don't know that excitement is the right word, but explains your curiosity and interest for the problems that you're going to be asked to solve, then it's not worth doing it because you're going to get so bored so fast that it's going to be a bad fit for you and it's going to be a bad fit for the team. And like that just creates a bad experience for everybody. So I think cover letters are super important as kind of a barometer, not just for the person looking at them hiring you, but for you as an applicant to even see if it's something that you really want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really I that's fully congruent with the way I do it. And I'll add to that. Whenever so I've also done this. Like I've applied in the past to positions and I just literally lose interest halfway through writing the cover letter. Um, and I'm like, well, whatever, this is probably not meant to be. So I want to really appreciate that. I want to double click a little bit on this earlier discussion we had. If we can jump topics to go back, you mentioned this beautiful natural landing strip with orchids. Um, and that pollinators can see UV light. I feel like there's a really silly question I want to ask here. I put off asking it because it will reveal how dumb I am. But I just want to ask it anyway. Um, we have black lights that show us things like fingerprints and stuff. Um, People say that's UV light and we can see it. So, what am I missing here? If like, do pollinators see black lights differently? If we shine a black light on an orchid, will we see the landing strip?
I don't know. I don't know, and I want to try it. But like, there's black lights and UV lights, and black lights do show you. Do they show you UV reflections though?
I
I
have
don't
no
know.
idea. Yeah, okay, good.
Now I want to know. I don't know. I don't know. I just know there's two separate ones, but I don't know.
Good. I'm so happy
I
that
would love to try that. Oh
me
my
too.
gosh. Because what if you could, like, what if you could see? Because I have been, this is tangent, I've been fascinated with how birds see because they are literally seeing colors that we can't understand. So, like, could we see a reflection of what they see? That would be cool.
Yeah, because like when you're getting like fake nails with shellac, like at the nail salon, which I know nothing about, but I have a wife who does. She doesn't do that anymore. Anyway, what she bought this machine now at home that she puts her hand into, and like they call it UV light, but it's not because I can say I don't know. So anyway, I'm excited to try that. I'm glad my question was not like completely ridiculous because it's yeah, it's interesting. Okay,
No,
I
it's
wanna.
a great question, and I want to try it. I have a UV light and I have a black light, so we could see. Because I always thought they were different, but maybe they're the same, and they're just entertain. I don't know, but I have orchids and I have that, so I feel
Oh,
like
I
I can
can't wait.
conduct this experiment.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see what you find. Let's pivot a little bit. You mentioned you recently came to Berlin, where we hung out, and went to a great speaker dinner type thing. Um, and then you didn't speak though. That's the thing. You didn't speak there, but you have spoken. I don't know where. Maybe you can tell us about Gestalt principles, which and how they can be applied to digital design. Um, I live in Germany. I know Gestalt is a German word, but that's pretty much all I know. So let's maybe start at the beginning. What are these principles and how do they apply to digital design?
So the where I spoke was at home in Portland, Oregon. It was for AIGA Portland. They were doing like a design month. And so it had speakers throughout Portland doing different talks and walks and all these things. So anyway, yeah, not in Berlin. Maybe one day though, goals. Um, so uh design principles. One of them being the Gestalt principles, which are basically how you perceive in digital design, how you perceive something. So, how you visually perceive it. So, like, if you have, I don't have anything in front of me. I should have like written up a card that I could
Well,
show.
people are going to be listening on audio anyway, more
Fair.
likely than
Okay. Well,
video.
then let me see how I can explain it. So, like, if you have a circle that's next to a bunch of other circles, you would see them as a unit versus
Yeah,
having a circle off to the side and then a bunch of circles in a different corner. Like the spacing, how you visually perceive it would be like a Gestalt principle.
interesting.
And so they are one of many different design principles that we can use to basically decide whether or not our design meets certain usability standards. And, as you're building your skeleton, you want to make sure that you are applying these principles appropriately, or else the design won't make sense to people. So, it's kind of like heuristics for design that allow you to create something that is more holistic and that is by the people that are using it.
Interesting. So it taps into the circuitry of how we tend to judge a book by its cover and how we like instinctively just mentally compartmentalize elements of digital design. So I think would it be fair to say that a really basic example of this is like a form with different groups. Like this is your username and password, this is your bio, and these are in separate like literal form groups. Are is that employing one of those Gestalt principles? Okay.
I would say that is, and also like visual hierarchy. So, when you have bigger title text and then heading texts, you visually know what's happening on the page due to higher or like bigger letters and smaller letters. And so like that visual hierarchy helps you understand how to read a page and allows you to
Right.
skim it too. Yeah.
Is there like a standard list of these principles? Sort of like the what is it called? The master detail thing where you have like a list and then you click on the list and you get the detail view. Is this a standardized list? Where does one find it?
I always use Nielsen Norman because they have very good standardized lists, but they have a standard list for design principles and also research heuristics. So they're a good resource for that.
Wild. What's the top three? Like what keeps coming up where you're like, this thing is so profound? Is it the maybe the textual flow you mentioned, the headings and paragraphs, or um if we talk about, for example, we spoke earlier that like literally every landing page looks the same in terms of design, excluded from artistic expression. When we look at the vast majority of landing pages, like what are the most common principles there?
I would actually put in a different one, which is oh no, the word just escaped me. Progressive disclosure,
Oh,
where
wait, can I guess what this is? Um, is this the one where like type form where you like show the next form field based on how someone filled out the first one? Is actually you're waving your head
well,
like
yeah, I mean, kind of like it is progressive disclosure is basically you're educating people as they're going along in small bits. So you only show them, I would say typeform would work for that. You're only showing them little bits as you're going forward so that you don't overwhelm them. It's used a lot for like really good onboarding scenarios. There's this idea of progressive disclosure where it gets you started on something easy and then it shows you more and more what you can do within the product as you go. And I think in terms of design principles, that one is one that I'm always advocating for. And I think is one of the most important things that you can do in design because it puts together both the structure, like the skeleton of the thing that you're making, and it makes you think about the system as a whole because you have to have an endpoint that you're trying to get somebody to, or else progressive disclosure doesn't work. It's like, here's this thing you can do, and then they go do it, and then they're just like in an open field, and it's like, well, now what? Um, so I think for me, that's one that I'm always advocating for, and I love it when it's done really well.
awesome. I've been working on a little side project that I added that to recently, and I'd love to show you. The cool thing about this is, like you said, design is pervasive. It's not confined to a screen and software. And so if I think about what do you call it? Progressive revelation, progressive disclosure. Um, I think of also Steve Jobs as effectively the third guest on this podcast, apparently, because like his famous 2007 iPhone introduction, and his demo that looked very much like progressive disclosure. It's like he pulls it out of his pocket and he's like, "Here, look, I just slide to unlock," which was like this moment back then, which was like, "What? He's totally just sliding this thing." And we could even maybe go one level higher, where the slide. I don't know if you remember this. I wish they bring this back. Like the slide to unlock slider had a shimmer of light that went in the direction you were supposed to slide. What? Apple has fallen so far from that amazing tree. Um, but in any case, like, is that then counts, right, as progressive disclosure? And so then you slide and then you unlock the phone, and before you can get overwhelmed, Jobs is like, and now I open the photo app and I want to zoom in, so I pinch. So all of this is sort of showing these extremely novel things to users without having them sort of freak out. Does that track?
Yes, it does. And I
Okay.
think like they're small little kind of bite-sized things that you can learn. And what he's doing is he's like onboarding people to a new design system, right? And doing it in a way that they can remember. And then there's those little hints, like there's the shimmer. And I think I don't know if this happened with the iPhone, but like, because I don't remember that far back. I mean, I remember the iPhone and I remember the shimmer thing, but I don't remember the first time I used the camera. But you can see on onboarding demos sometimes they'll show you like a little icon of like, oh, if you need to zoom in or zoom out, like it'll show
Yeah.
you how to do it physically on the screen, right? And that's another way of like of a reminder of how to do it and showing educating someone step by step rather than trying to do it all at once or just letting them discover what to do, which people think, I don't know, it feels like sometimes people are like, oh, they go there and then they can discover it. And it's like, well, not if they don't know what's possible. Like they don't even know what's possible. How can they discover if they have no idea where they're at? So
Yeah. Yeah, this was like also I think the Touch ID setup is very progressive disclosure, where it shows you a fingerprint and it's like put your fingerprint here and then you put it there and then it's like incrementally lights up. This is huge for us. This is like gold mine for people building products. I think this is so valuable. And it's having me like rethink a lot of the things I do when I'm building, either at DataStax or in my free time. Um, I think progressive like also if we think about the design metaphor, this podcast, right, we like usually try to format an episode such that we start at the beginning with just like, I don't know what even is design, and then we go deeper and deeper, which is a form of progress. This is so cool. This is the way. It sounds like this is totally the way to get people on board. I will confess, I built products previously where I was in this path of like I believed maybe the lie. I want to hear from you if you think this is a lie. I think you do, but I'd love to hear sort of more nuance around this. I used to build products and then think to myself, if this is designed well and it's extremely intuitive and there's all the heuristics in place, then indeed people can just discover it. And so what I've done is I've tested it. So I built a prototype and I just put it in front of someone. Um, and I'd say 9 out of 10 times they were just like, what am I looking at? And I was very disappointed by this because I put my heart and soul into making it intuitive, only to find out, oh, it's not. It's intuitive to like a sample of one, me. Um, and so yeah, this whole like self-discovery thing versus progressive disclosure. Today, based on what you've said, I think really the path of discovery is just an invalid path.
yeah, and I think the path of discovery can happen only after people understand where they're at, right? So if you think of a product as like a map, if you give someone a map, but they don't know where they are on the map, how does that help them?
Yeah, right.
They're
They
like,
need
this
to
is a
know,
map,
yeah, they need to
you know?
know first where they want to go and then where they are, right?
Exactly. And so I think that there's that. And then also I when you're talking about the I expected people to discover it and then they didn't, and it was discoverable to one person, me, the person who created it. This is where research and design converge, because as someone who does a lot of research, that's the thing I'm screaming from the rooftops, which is you are not your user. Like it's extremely intuitive. Products are extremely intuitive to the people who are working on them every day or to the person who created them and had a vision. But to everybody else, like if you don't give them a path of how they're supposed to use something and how that thing makes their life better or easier or whatever, they're likely not going to be able to discover it, or they'll only discover, which is something, this is something I've seen multiple times. They'll discover one or two things, and then you get put in a box of these are the one or two things that this product can do, and they've created a mental model around it that is really, really difficult to break. So if you from the outset do this progressive disclosure and educate people and help them discover, create that map and show them where they are on it, you will have a much better chance of having them create a mental model around your product that's bigger and probably more real to what you as the creator intended.
Awesome. You've identified here in what you just said, a trap that, I fell into and that a lot of people fall into is you design things as the maker of it and you develop this like intimate knowledge of how it works, only to find out that you're the only one with this, right? And I think another example of where design goes wrong is I've seen people, I'm using a metaphor here, I haven't seen this in the real world, but I've seen people sort of build a house with bricks, but they're like up close to the bricks. Their nose is basically touching the bricks, and then they like take 10 steps backward and they find out, oh wow, I didn't even build a house. This is some weird thing, because they just didn't have that perspective. And I've seen this more with software because let's be honest, I don't really do anything in the physical world other than like sports. But um, in any case, this is a trap that I've fallen into, and I think a lot of builders fall into. What are some ways that we can help ourselves not? Is it just really, hey, cultivate some empathy, go study empathy, and then you'll understand where others might be coming from, because that's essentially what empathy is. You'll have that resonance with them, and then you'll think more about the experience you're giving them, kind of like you were doing with your website, your landing page that you created to accompany your cover letter. Is that the best we can do? Is it learning and growing the skill of empathy, or is there more we can do to avoid falling into that trap?
I think that empathy is kind of the overarching theme that you can think about, but there's what you're trying to do is understand and scaffold out the problem, right? So instead of thinking like, how can I connect with my user, or what do they need? Instead, framing them all as problems. What problem am I trying to solve? Why is it a problem? Why do I want to solve it? And then how am I solving it? So you've got this kind of overarching structure. And from there, that then tells you who your user base is, at which point you can start to try and connect with them either through talking to them, or I'm a big believer in personas as like an initial thing to do to understand how someone thinks. But you have to have an answer to those problem questions first. And I think from the products that I've seen built, like from friends and smaller startups, there was like one main problem they were trying to solve. And then it feels like after they've solved that problem, there's not an understanding of why it was worth solving. Because some things are just fun to solve. Like they're fun, and there is something beautiful in making something that's just fun, right? And it solves a problem for that person, but maybe doesn't need to solve a problem for anybody else. And I think that's the question that doesn't get asked a lot, is like, what problem am I trying to solve, and why am I solving it? And then who am I solving it for? Because if it's just you, that's okay. But you should know that like as you're going into it, you know? Because I think it helps set expectations better, and then reduces disappointment. Whereas if you say, who is this for? And it's only for you, great. Like you can do whatever you want with it then, you know, versus this is for a specific user base, which requires talking to those people and
Right.
actually knowing what it is they want.
Right. So it's starting from a place of what am I doing, why am I doing it, and who am I doing it for? And again, I love that you just sort of normalize this idea that it's totally fine to just get nerd sniped and solve it for yourself. Just know that nobody's going to care. I think is the takeaway. I've seen you use the term biophilic design in the context of engineering. And I don't. So I know Latin a little bit. And biophilic, the love of biology. Um, and I only know this because I have hemophilia, which is the love of blood. I'm not a vampire, but it kind of sounds like it. In any case, biophilic design, what is it, and how can engineers benefit from employing it, if at all?
So, biophilic design is where we are using nature as part of mainly right now architectural design. So, you can see this a lot in Singapore, where the buildings that they have built incorporate in a few like buildings, almost complete forests that they've like put inside the building or on the
Inside.
outside of, yeah. It's really cool. I really want to go see it. It's like one of the World Bank buildings or something. I can find that too. I did an article on it. It's really cool.
Is it
Um,
not? Does that not make the climate inside the building humid and like tropical? And then how do they ventilate that?
it's all open. Like it's
Oh, what?
open sided. So the ventilation comes through both sides. And because the climate is fairly mild, like the plants don't need to be protected. Probably does create a microclimate um, within the building.
Inside a concrete structure. That's wild.
Well, it's concrete, but it's open on the sides. So like it's well ventilated.
But then how do people not fall out the sides?
They don't go to the edges. They don't, you
Okay.
know, I don't know. That's they just trust people to be
Okay.
smart.
Yeah. I feel like there's in Germany this would never work. You're going to get regulated so hard for not
Yeah, I
like
mean, it would never work here either. Like having an open thing from like the floor to ceiling where it's like there's a
wild.
very shallow ledge, never. But there, it works. Super
Sounds kind of
cool.
cool.
Because I mean, if it were enclosed, it would create like humidity and mold problems so bad. But the pictures I've seen, it's all open. Um, but so biophilic design is incorporating these natural elements into your physical design, with the idea being that that connection to nature is actually something that's really mentally healthy and emotionally calming for people, which is something that has been studied, like access to nature and being able to have some bit of nature within your daily life is very calming. Um, Being used in engineering, I think, or for software design, I will have to get you the name of this engineer because I don't have it off the top of my head. But she actually does biophilic design. I don't know if she knows she's doing it, but her web page is a garden, like a illustrated garden that she's drawn.
Wow.
And it has little animations. It's got a little, I think it's a lemon tree, that kind of sways in the wind. You can water the garden, with your cursor, like your cursor is a little watering can.
That's so
And
cool.
it's her, like her landing page basically, where you can like see her resume and everything like that. Um, but it is very calming. Like it's a very delightful little site to go to. Um, and so I think that in that way, actually bringing natural elements into software design can be something that is, if not just novel, really enjoyable for people. Um, and like I'm talking about it, and I saw this months ago, so it was obviously also very memorable. Um, because I do think that there is like a natural core within us that wants to stay connected to nature, even if we don't realize it. Um, and I think we see that in the research that shows, when you take a 10-minute walk through a park or in a forest, your heart rate decreases. You're able to like be more emotionally regulated. Like our bodies want to be connected in that way. So I think bringing it visually where we're like drawing nature, illustrating nature, and then finding different ways to interact with it is, I don't know, it's a super cool way to do it.
There's a Dr. Justin Sonnenberg, who's a microbiologist out of Stanford University. They wrote a book, him and his wife, about gut bacteria, um, and how this affects everything we do. And he makes a joke, but it's kind of not a joke, where he says that they're actually just controlling us. They drive us from the gut and make us do things. And it's true, like they do give us cravings and things like that. But as his sort of joke, not joke, is it's also that when they get the sunlight and the nature therapy that they need, they make us feel happy. Whether that's true or not, I think there's no question that nature therapy is a proven therapy, right? It makes us feel wonderful. That's why like cities like Berlin and probably Portland, I don't know, have this like mandate for green spaces because it's important for human health. That said, I like what you're saying. Bringing it to software can, without even maybe our users knowing, be like give them delightful experiences that make a product sticky and ultimately drive up like shareholder value. um, Interesting. What are some ways we can do that aside from like I think the obvious is like replace all your buttons with like things that look like grass or so people are touching grass. I don't like, you know what I mean? Like if I start to think about making this practical, I immediately get maybe crazy ideas, but maybe obvious ideas. So if there's an engineer now who listened to this and says, that's it, I'm going to redo my landing page, or no, maybe that's not because it's too personal. I'm going to redo my company's user interface that puts 10,000 monthly revenue dollars at stake. What might be some biophilic ways we can turn, or biophilic ways, the German is getting to me. Um, what might be some biophilic ways that not only can they preserve the revenue they have without freaking out their users, right? But also maybe even like amplify it. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think that especially on, kind of more static pages or landing pages, there are ways to kind of abstract out something that is natural and put it on the page. And it still has the benefit of being really enjoyable or calming, even if we don't see it, like even if we don't immediately like conceptualize it as a natural thing. So there's a landing page that I saw a couple months ago when they did a redesign where they used the aurora borealis as inspiration for the background of the landing page. So like they still had all of the information that needed to be there, right? But the aurora borealis is fairly subtle. Like I don't know if you've ever gotten to see it in person, but it actually shows up best on camera, not by eye. It shows
Oh,
up more brightly on cameras. Um,
is that
because
your way of saying it's really underwhelming for those who have it on their bucket list?
no,
The
well, I've only seen it in Portland where it's like way far south, like shouldn't be this far south. So someone who's like out in like what,
Finland?
Iceland, Finland,
Yeah.
watching it, probably way brighter. All I know is what I saw with my eyes versus the camera was way brighter. But the like it has a beauty, like this beautiful subtlety to it, where you can see things moving across the sky, but sometimes it's kind of hard to identify what. And that's what they've done on the land. They did on the landing page where they like made these colors kind of subtly move. And if you have seen pictures of an aurora borealis or like videos, and then you think about it, you're like, oh my gosh, that is what that is. And I think that that's a really one example of a really good way of like bringing in something that is natural into a digital space that then it kind of is in the background, but it's part of that quality of experience, right? Like they cared enough to do that in the background, and it's beautiful, um and shows that they like wanted to take the time to make the experience very calming and very enjoyable. um and so I think you can do that throughout, like throughout the throughout software design and throughout landing page design as well, where like if you're doing this visual element on top of it, that artistic expression, you can take patterns from nature, or things that you see in the natural world and kind of abstract them out, maximize them or minimize them. Like take that orchid design that's that very specific pattern and maximize it, and it creates a really bright backdrop on your landing page. And we won't probably have a direct connection of like, oh, that's looks like an orchid flower. But I really do believe that like on a level that you're not even really thinking about, you recognize that pattern even when you don't realize you recognize it. And that can create something that is really enjoyable and really calming.
That's so cool. And indeed, there is research that backs this up. I'm realizing as you're talking that yet again, Apple has done this masterfully since the beginning, right? Like I think of like Snow Leopard, where the default wallpaper was the Aurora Borealis, literally. Probably for that reason. Even now today with the whole like California theme with El Capitan and I don't know what the latest one is, but like the default wallpaper is these trees in some natural park in California. So
And I don't know how old my operating system is, so maybe I'm probably telling everybody, but I don't know if people realize this, but it's a California poppy.
oh wow.
Yeah. It's a close up of a California poppy if you were to go zoom in on the petals.
There you go. That's absolute. So they've been doing this since day one, and look, it worked. And now that you mentioned this, Marissa, I realized. So when I was 15 years old, there was a there was a web design contest for kids in high school, and uh, I ended up winning first prize of this thing. And this website that I designed and built to win this was one around environmental conservation. It was literally called envycon.com or whatever. And like the entire design of this thing was extremely natural. Like at the baseline of the browser, so position fixed bottom zero, left zero with 100 for those who speak CSS. Like there was literal grass, like a long repeated tiled graphic of grass, and the entire thing was green and blue, and it like looked like nature. And now that you mention it like this, I'm really not surprised I won. That's wild. I actually used people's biology against them in a sense. Um, wow, incredible. Okay, so biophilic design is something that we can employ to really create not just delightful user experiences, but memorable ones. And there may be a sort of capitalistic benefit here to creating sticky products that make users come back. And it's definitely something to explore. Awesome. Thank you. That's a huge takeaway. I wanna poke your brain on one more thing, and then we can maybe talk about a topic that we can't talk about. Oh, interesting. But you mentioned the law of proximity in UI frameworks. Um, what is that? I feel this episode is one where I feel so out of my depth. As a little aside, I have not had Sean Wang Swix, a friend of ours, on the podcast, because I'm just intimidated by him. He's so intelligent, and I feel like I feel that now. I feel really intimidated because like you're this like wealth of knowledge about nature and design, and I'm just sitting here going like, what is that? What is that? And I'm learning a ton. So thank you. Anyway, law of proximity with UI.
So the law of proximity is basically how you, whether or not you group things together or not. And so in with UI design, we use it a lot for button placement and like grouping together like things. So if you have an action that you want somebody to take, like you want them to click that button, it has to be close enough to the information that they are currently reading or that's directing them in order for them to take that action. Otherwise, it's like too separated and they don't understand that like they are the same, they are contained within the same information set. So
Yeah,
it's basically a way
cool.
that it gives us a way to organize UIs and products to make it easier for people to read through and to understand where they are within that product and what action you want them to take.
Is this a Gestalt principle?
I think it is.
Nice. I I'm learning so much right now. Um, Awesome. Now, if somebody wanted to do this, if they wanted to implement things like the law of proximity, if they wanted to implement biophilic design, if they wanted to employ all of these well-vetted Gestalt principles, right? But they had a manager they needed to convince. And this manager loves Windows 98. They think this is like the gold standard. Gray boxes, like embossed like buttons. Um, and it's a tough nut to crack with the manager. What metrics do you think somebody can use to make the case for? I mean, there's the research papers. We'll probably put links to those in the show notes that show that hey, touching grass once in a while actually makes you like emotionally regulate a lot better. Um, but if you show this to like a capitalist manager who doesn't care about people, like I don't think that's going to move the needle. So if someone was to make like a business case with metrics and Q3 OKRs and all this nonsense, and I do call it nonsense because honestly, a lot of like big tech and even small tech, frankly, is just a bunch of make believe. Probably gonna get in trouble for this. I don't care. In any case, what metrics can we use to convince sort of managers and higher ups to help to let us make more delightful experiences through these principles and biophilic design and others?
So I think that first of all, if you are able to get the leeway or just do it and not get in trouble for it to talk to people and do like quick prototypes, you can do a lot of sentiment testing to see which design people prefer or which visual design people prefer. That can be a really good way. It's
So
cheap.
like with A/B testing, you mean?
I wouldn't do A/B testing just because something has to be live, but similar thing, right? Where you can go in and you can do like something like Maze. You don't have to even talk to people. You can put in your design or put in multiple designs and do a sentiment test where you ask people which one they would prefer, why they prefer it. And when you're talking about the visual part of a website, you're trying to understand what people like what resonates with them. Not necessarily the design should already be, at least if not done, you should know how people are going to go through the site, right? Like that's the design element. This visual part, though, you can do sentiment testing and see what connects with people more. I also think I would need to check on this, but I would bet you that is already research and studies that have been done on interaction on sites that have more naturalistic elements versus not. Because it's something that has been proven over and over again in the physical world. My guess is there's some like super smart researcher at Google or something, or IBM or somewhere that has done information, like done the research on this, and you could use that as a supplement. But honestly, like every time that I have been able to convince someone in leadership of an idea, it has been using the voices of the user base and the customers, because it's so compelling when you hear someone say that they love something or that they hate something. And that, in a lot of ways, if you can get at least a few people that kind of agree or have an opinion, that can kind of stand as its own metric.
Awesome. Thank you. That's so useful. I guess the only like edge case there is if a company doesn't have any users, which in that case, ideally it's just the Wild West. Try stuff on like we had a season with founders and CEOs on the podcast, and really everyone was just like, look, if you have no users, it's your responsibility to just try a million different things all in parallel and see what sticks. And so I think in that case you don't even need to convince anyone. Just like try it biophilically and try it non-biophilically and then see where it lands, right?
And I think that might be the real area of A/B testing, because that is live and you do multiple versions, right? Like a multivariate test. And when you do that, then you can get, if you don't have people that are going to be upset with the change, or not a lot of people that know that anything has changed, or that
Yeah.
there's multiple versions, then you can ship those multiple versions to different prospective users and get the interaction rates, get the like sentiment from those A/B testing or multivariate testing.
Yeah. I think really, if I was to wager a guess, I think most users just wouldn't notice for the vast majority of products. Because like I've been working in tech long enough to know that we live in an attention economy. Nobody cares. Which is why, like, we had a discussion before we started recording, like, should I use this microphone? Should I not? Honestly, like, whatever. The real ones who care will love it, and the other ones won't, and that's fine. Anyway, on that note, I understand you're working on a book, Marissa. This is very exciting. And we've talked about it sort of off podcast. Of course, you haven't ever like leaked anything that you weren't supposed to, even when there was no microphone. Like, why would you? Person of integrity. In any case, can we talk about that? Like, let's maybe for the listeners do like a summary, like high level, what it is, what it leads to, and then if you're able, we could go a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So the book, I'm co-authoring it with several other authors, which has been really fun. But it's about human-centered design and urban sustainability. So when we create cities, how can we create them with sustainability in mind, and using human-centered design as the basis for city building and community building? Because when we incorporate humans into the design process for the cities that they have to live in, we create more livable cities, more equitable cities, and cities that are more sustainable, both from an infrastructure level and from a climate sustainability perspective. And so the book
You
kind of
mentioned
explores that.
you mentioned create cities, which I feel like for a lot of people listening, they would have this moment of like, whoa, cities, you're just talking about software, man. Where did this come from? But okay, so it's taking what we've talked about so far, design, human-centered design specifically, and applying it on a much broader scale to cities. You said it's used to build cities, but I feel like some listeners may be hearing this and thinking, again, out of empathy, maybe thinking, but like, aren't cities already built? Are we building new cities? What does that even look like? Is it more of a incremental adoption path, or hey, we just discovered a brand new barren land piece on Earth. Now we're going to make a city from scratch. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask here on behalf of the listeners is, how does that fit into like existing cities in the world?
So all of the cities that we live in, or communities that we live in, are constantly being built and rebuilt based on both growth or decline. The general population changes, as a population ages or as a population has more babies being born. Like the community that lives within that area makes the city. And so they're constantly being rebuilt. So even though they already exist, the infrastructure, the physical environment, the green public spaces, the education system is constantly being rebuilt. And the more that we incorporate human-centered design principles into that creation of infrastructure, of our public spaces and things like that, we believe from this book, we've kind of talked about, like, we think that that can make our cities better on a much bigger scale. Like they can make our cities more livable and more sustainable for more people, which, and this is my opinion, but like when you have a city, you want to have a level of quality, right, across the city for everyone that lives there. And human-centered design is a way that you can do that.
Right. And you want to make it so that I was actually having this very intense discussion the other day with someone extremely political and highly invested in specifically this topic. And they mentioned, and I sort of, actually, I mentioned, this was my idea. I mentioned that it's really the responsibility of a municipality or an urban planning committee or even government to like enable everyone to be able to sort of drink water. What does that mean? There's this old saying, like you can take a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. I think that's the responsibility of a good city, municipality, or government is to take people to the water, so to speak. You can't make them drink. Sure, people will ultimately make their own choices, but it needs to be like the great enabler. It needs to take people who are maybe disenfranchised or marginalized or not people born without legs. You need to give them wheelchairs and help them with ramps and things like that so that they can go shopping and they can go get what if they want to. Of course, the desire to do so still comes from them, but like a city needs to sort of unblock people if we speak engineering. Does that track at all? Is this sort of one of the focus points of the book, like how cities might do that?
Yeah, we talk about equitability and access, like the future of equitability and access, in a little bit in one of the chapters. And I would agree with you. Like a city should provide equity and access to its people. And again, there should be that level of quality that exists throughout the city, level of quality for housing, a level of quality for access to green public spaces, a level of quality for public transit. And the city should provide all of those things and then expand and change it based on the specific needs of that city's population. Because each city population is different. Like the people that live in Portland, Oregon, they have a different set of needs than the people that live in Berlin, because we have different topography, we have different weather, we have different ways that our city has been built, and so we have different needs, even if, or we have different ways that we need to access things, even if we all have the same core needs. So yeah, and I think it is the city's responsibility to provide that access and provide it in a way that is equitable to the entire population.
Well, it's interesting because I love that you mentioned a city is like a living standard. It's a thing that's constantly in the process of iteration. It's like the longest lived company that you could possibly have. Um, and it's constantly being updated and changing. I've seen some cities in an attempt to bring this level of quality that you mentioned to everybody. What they do is they add little bumps on surfaces where homeless people lie down so that homeless people go away. Um, and I find this so odd and tricky because, on the one hand, it can make some specific people feel safer, um, and feel like, the city is quote unquote cleaner than they would otherwise think. But on the other hand, it literally just like excludes the whole class of people, which I find pretty problematic. So like there's many ways to skin a cat, as I was saying, because there's many ways to like bring this level of quality. How can we, and maybe this is addressed in the book. I know you can't like speak too much about it. How can we make sure that we bring the quality in a way that's healthy for the vast majority of people, and that doesn't like to bless one group make another group cursed.
I think the biggest thing is community involvement. Like it's very difficult for us as single individuals to make change on a national scale unless we have a huge, huge group to do it. But as an individual, you have an outsized voice in your community if you're willing and able to show up and say something. And so I think, for marginalized groups, if you're able to talk with them, if you are a part of the marginalized group or you're able to talk with them, if they're not able to show up, showing up in the community meetings, showing up at the municipal meetings, and being active in those and knowing what's happening, it puts the spotlight on what's happening within the community and makes people more aware so that they can decide as a community what is quality to us, like what is the bare minimum that needs to exist. And like in speaking to what you're talking about with the like the ridges or bumps that they put on sleeping and sitting areas, like that is a short term, and I'm using the word in quotes, solution, because it's not really a solution. It's a short term decision to a long term problem that stems from affordability and quality. Again, like everything comes back to quality, affordability, and access, right? And so it won't actually fix anything. It just moves people, but it doesn't help them. And so being able to show up and say, like, we see what's happening and we propose that you do something different, and here's why. On a local level, that can actually have a bigger effect. On a national level, it's probably too hard to do. But if you can get the community together to talk about it on a local level, that momentum can build.
Awesome. So there's power in volume, is what I'm hearing. Interesting. Yeah, I think fundamentally the homeless problem in the vast majority of cities, at least in the United States, comes from the existence of billionaires, which, we can maybe talk about. I think there's really nothing there to talk about. I think we just agree that like if a country has billionaires, it's just a sign that they're not managing their money properly. I don't like I aspire to be one as a way of like proving to myself that I can, but honestly, I wouldn't even be happy with like the moment I have $1 billion, I realize so I'm not paying someone fairly somewhere. That's really it. Anyway, this book it sounds awesome. I want to read it. I want to I'm not an urban planner, but I want to learn how I can play my part. And it sounds like there's takeaways for just the everyday individual who lives in a city, right? As you mentioned. Is this going to be something that I can just go buy from a bookstore?
I think so. I think it'll be both online and in print sometime this year. I'm not sure the exact date yet. We're waiting to hear back on that, but it's in final edits now. So we should have more information in the next like couple months of when the published date is.
Awesome. I'm really excited to do that. And on that note, listen, Marissa, it's been so excellent having you blow my mind repeatedly on this pod. I mean, from the UV light on orchids, inspiring airports, to how all of this ties into making business cases for bringing blue-green spaces into the virtual world and the Gestalt principles and everything in between. You've given so much quality knowledge and information here that I think is definitely changed my perspective on a lot of things, and it will change a ton. So, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming and spending the time to do this real great service to humanity.
Thank you so much. It was fun, and I love talking about nature and design and how everything intersects. So I appreciate you talking with me.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Marisa Morby. I hope you feel inspired to look around at nature and discover the design that is everywhere. And then I hope you're able to take that design and work it into all of the things that we do on a daily basis, from calendar and events to meetings to breakfast to whatever. The world is beautiful design. And the more we embrace it and enjoy it and give thanks for it, I truly believe the better things we create. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support it at no cost is to just like the video on YouTube if you're watching there and subscribe while you're at it. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then if you leave any review, literally up to a 5-star review, but anything up to it, it'll just signal to the platforms that this is something worth listening to, and it would help as well. And of course, if there's anything valuable here, then clipping or even sharing the full length episode on social media would be a great way to make it more discoverable. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.